The Indiana Coalition Against Sexual Assault hasn't been operating for months, and advocates worry that means those dealing with sexual assault aren't getting the help they need. INCASA shut down in June after it was unable to pay overdue taxes dating back to 2012. The coalition has a court-appointed receiver who will attempt to restructure its finances. Barbara Harrington explains what that means for sexual assault survivors in the meantime.
Kristen Polisi has spent the last few months sitting in front of her computer, thinking.
I was shocked. I thought it was a travesty.
The shock from losing her job over the summer hasn't worn off. That's when INCASA suspended operations and laid off all staff. Now the only access the public has to the coalition is through its website, which features only an announcement about the organization's closure and a place to donate money to help with the financial shortfall. Polisi can't stop thinking about what that could mean for sexual assault survivors.
My fear is that if we are not able to bring it back, that the voice of sexual assault will once again be just a whisper. It has always been a quiet voice behind larger issues such as domestic violence, and we need to have a strong voice for sexual assault here in the state of Indiana.
According to the Centers for Disease Control, Indiana is the second worst state for rape among high school-aged girls. INCASA provided training to service providers and law enforcement that showed them how to respond to sexual assault, and it connected survivors like Malia Crosby with resources to help them heal.
It was so instrumental in my own healing journey that it was almost like grieving a loss for something to be gone. It's detrimental to survivors. You know, where do we turn for services? I think that there's a big gap in what's available for us.
Crosby says without INCASA, there's no statewide one-stop shop for survivors to turn to in the event of a crisis. Some counties are trying to pick up that slack, but she says it's not as effective.
Vigo County, it's handled through our domestic violence shelter, but people don't know to turn there.
The closing of INCASA also has service providers like Legacy House worried.
This is our group room. So
the counseling agency works with children and adults, helping them to cope with trauma through therapy and art.
And our wishes for peace in his life and relief from the anxiety so he can sit and just be like the peaceful tree he created on this canvas.
Legacy House works with survivors of violence and sexual assault, and Executive Director Michael Hurst says it's important not to lump those issues together.
Domestic violence is family violence, and yes, it typically involves gender against the other gender. But sexual assault offers a whole host of other kinds of traumas, and the response, both from a legislative policy development standpoint and the response from a treatment standpoint, is much different than the response is when you're working with somebody who's been involved or a victim of chronic domestic abuse over the course of a long period of time.
Hurst worries the absence of INCASA will be especially noticeable during the upcoming legislative session. The coalition spent much of its time on the third level of the State House, advocating for bills that give sexual assault survivors more power and protection.
I'm reading what different legislators are thinking about doing and working with them as best as I can to help inform what they're doing. But again, we're a service provider, and so it's very difficult to stay focused on the policy development when you're in the process of serving 1,200 unduplicated clients over the course of a year.
State Representative Christina Hale says she's committed to leading the fight against sexual assault in the State House. She plans to file several bills during the upcoming session relating to the statute of limitations and sentencing guidelines for rape. But sexual assault is just one of many issues she has to tackle.
I think not having a respected advocate in the State House, that's not politicized, that's really just about doing good things for people and victims here in Indiana, that voice is going to be missing. I'm not certain that funding will necessarily be affected negatively. Where the funding goes and how it gets spent could be affected, and that could have implications for services.
Most of INCASA's funding comes from a federal rape prevention and education grant. Two other groups, Multicultural Efforts to End Sexual Assault and the Indiana Campus Sexual Assault Primary Prevention Project, also receive a portion of that money. Hale says in order for the state to dedicate the resources necessary to fight sexual assault, INCASA needs to reopen, or a new not-for-profit needs to be created to fill that role. That's exactly what Pelisi's been thinking. Even after losing her job, she remains hopeful because she says the fight against sexual assault is far too important for INCASA to be dissolved.
INCASA's doors are closed, but the entity still exists, and there's a lot of people that want it to stay.
There is no timeline for INCASA's possible recovery. That's up to the court and the appointed receiver. Reporter Barbara Harrington joins us now to talk more about what we can expect in the coming months. So how bad is INCASA's financial situation?
Well, Joe, that's exactly what the court-appointed receiver is tasked with trying to figure out. Her name's Deborah Daniels. She was appointed to that position, and she's combing through INCASA's finances right now, trying to figure out how and if they can move forward and perhaps reopen. We heard during that story that there is a lot of support for getting this organization back up and running.
We heard in the story Representative Hale will file several bills regarding sexual assault. What is she hoping to propose or change that's different from last time?
She has quite an extensive list of things that she's hoping to accomplish this legislative session. The first one, her first priority, is coming up with a definition for consent. That's something the state of Indiana doesn't have right now, and she says it's really essential to have that definition. It'll help in prosecuting rape and sexual assault cases. Hale also wants to break down barriers that could possibly prevent people from reporting instances of sexual assault. So she's introducing a bill that would allow those who are 18 and older who are still on their parents' insurance plans, when they receive treatment for sexual assault, the explanation of benefits will go to that 18-year-old, that young adult, instead of their parents. Right now, the explanation of benefits goes to their parents, which could cue them in that a sexual assault has taken place.
Well, I assume that would deter a lot of people because kids, they don't want to tell their parents about that. It's hard.
Exactly. Well, you know, a lot of these instances go unreported, and a lot of kids don't want their parents to know about this. Now, Hale is also working on two other measures that deal with prosecution. The first deals with the criminal code. If you remember last year, legislators made some changes. One of those dealt with the sentencing guidelines for rape. It dropped from 6 years down to 3 years. Hale wants to change that back. She wants it to be 6 years. She also wants to increase the statute of limitations for prosecuting rape from 10 to 15 years. So a lot on her plate.
And just really short, does she think she has the support of her other legislators?
She says she thinks she has the support on both sides of the aisle, that they see the importance of this.
Okay, thank you very much, Barbara.